Lisa and Mark seemed like an unlikely pair, yet their secret affair would ultimately lead to a chilling murder in the Bahamas. Lisa, the pregnant wife desperate for attention, and Mark, the charming neighbor who promised her the love she craved, never imagined their passionate connection would end in bloodshed. But when a deadly argument escalates beyond control, the lines between love, betrayal, and murder blur in the most shocking way. Lisa and James had always been the picture of a perfect couple. They had met in their early 20s and quickly fallen in love, with their bond growing stronger every year. After getting married, they decided to move to the Bahamas, seeking a fresh start in the tropical paradise far from the bustling city they had once called home. Their house, perched on a cliff overlooking the crystal-clear waters, was a symbol of their success and contentment. It was a life many envied, with the sun always shining and the gentle waves crashing against the shore. James, a successful businessman, had built a thriving career that allowed them to live comfortably. However, as his business continued to grow, so did his workload. Long days at the office and frequent trips abroad became the norm. Lisa, now pregnant with their first child, was left alone in their spacious home more often than not. At first, she didn't mind the quiet. She had always enjoyed the peaceful surroundings, but as her pregnancy progressed, she began to feel the weight of isolation. The once vibrant conversations between her and James became less frequent, their connection slowly fading as his attention shifted elsewhere. Lisa tried to stay busy, attending prenatal classes and visiting the local markets, but the loneliness gnawed at her. She often found herself gazing out at the ocean, wondering what had happened to the close-knit bond they had once shared. It wasn't that she didn't love James, it was just that she felt a growing emptiness she couldn't ignore. She needed more, but didn't know where to turn or how to fill the void that had quietly crept into her life. The quiet, monotonous days seemed to stretch endlessly for Lisa, each one blending into the next. Her growing belly was a reminder of the life inside her, a life that should have been filled with joy and anticipation. Yet, as James continued to spend more time at work, she felt increasingly distant from him. Her friends were far away, and the friends she had made in the Bahamas were busy with their own lives. It wasn't long before Lisa began to feel like a stranger in her own home. That's when she first noticed Mark. He lived just a few houses down the beach, a neighbor who had recently moved to the area to work in a local tech startup. Lisa had seen him around the neighborhood, always waving with a friendly smile. At first, their interactions were casual, just brief hellos as they crossed paths during her daily walks along the shore. But over time, their conversations grew longer as Mark would stop and chat whenever he saw her. Lisa found herself looking forward to these brief moments of connection, especially as James's absence became more noticeable. Mark was easy to talk to, his charm and wit a welcome distraction from the growing emptiness Lisa had been feeling. He was genuinely interested in her, asking about her pregnancy and listening attentively to her frustrations. For the first time in months, Lisa felt heard. His attention, though innocent at first, soon began to feel comforting. He wasn't like James, who had become wrapped up in his own world. Mark made her feel important again. Before long, their conversations became more frequent. Mark would offer to help her with small tasks around the house, like carrying groceries or fixing a broken fence. Lisa never thought much of it at the time, but deep down, she knew something was beginning to stir between them, a feeling she couldn't ignore. As weeks passed, the connection between Lisa and Mark deepened. What had started as friendly conversations soon evolved into something more. Lisa couldn't deny the chemistry that was building between them, despite her initial hesitation. Mark was attentive and present in a way that James had stopped being, his every word and gesture making her feel seen and valued. In the absence of her husband's affection, Mark's attention filled the gaps that had begun to widen in her marriage. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Lisa took her usual walk along the beach. Mark happened to be outside when she passed by, and noticing her distant demeanor, he suggested they take a break and sit down together. They sat on the porch of his modest beach house, the soft breeze cooling the warm air. They talked for hours, with Lisa opening up more than she had in months. She confessed how lonely she felt, how disconnected she had become from James, and how lost she was in her own life. Mark listened quietly, nodding, offering small words of reassurance. But the more they talked, the more Lisa felt herself drawn to him. He was a soothing presence, someone who made her feel alive again. As the conversation began to shift, Mark's tone became softer, his proximity closer. His hand brushed against hers, and for a moment, Lisa froze. She had never thought of him in this way, but now she felt the pull of something undeniable. Mark leaned in, and without thinking, Lisa found herself kissing him. It was a soft kiss at first, hesitant, but as it deepened, all her guilt and confusion seemed to melt away. The spark that had been smoldering between them for weeks now erupted into full-blown passion. The affair had begun. Neither of them knew where it would lead, but in that moment, it didn't matter. As the affair between Lisa and Mark progressed, Lisa felt herself caught in a web of emotions. The intensity of their secret meetings created a thrilling escape, but it also filled her with guilt and confusion. She had crossed a line she never thought she would, and yet, when she was with Mark, everything seemed to make sense. He made her feel desired, cherished, and important. The loneliness that had plagued her for so long was replaced with the excitement of their clandestine encounters. But at the same time, the weight of what she was doing started to take its toll. Lisa tried to convince herself that she was justified. James had become distant, consumed by work, and no longer seemed to care about her. Mark, on the other hand, was always there when she needed him, paying attention to every detail, listening to her fears and hopes, and offering comfort in ways James no longer did. In those stolen moments, she felt alive again, like the woman she had once been before pregnancy and the endless days of isolation. But as the months went on, the affair grew more complicated. Lisa started to notice changes in Mark's behavior. He was becoming more possessive, more demanding. He began hinting that he wanted more than just these secret encounters. He wanted her to leave James and be with him permanently. Lisa felt trapped. Her heart was torn between the man who had become her emotional refuge and the husband she had once loved. She didn't want to destroy her marriage, but she also couldn't ignore the growing pull she felt toward Mark. The pressure mounted. With each passing day, Lisa knew she couldn't keep this up forever, but the thought of ending the affair terrified her. She was in too deep, and the risks of being caught seemed less real in the heat of the moment. The deeper she fell, the harder it became to find a way out. James had always been an attentive husband, at least in the beginning, but as time went on, his focus shifted. His business, which had once been a shared priority, was now his sole obsession. He spent countless hours on the phone, traveling for work, and attending meetings that seemed to have no end. Lisa tried to keep the house in order, keeping herself busy with the preparations for the baby, but the absence of her husband was impossible to ignore. She longed for the days when they would talk for hours, share meals together, and dream of their future as a family. Now, it felt like James was a stranger, someone who was physically present but emotionally absent. The first signs of suspicion came slowly. Lisa would find James staring at her when she least expected it. His eyes narrowed as if searching for something he couldn't quite place. She brushed it off as stress from work, but the looks became more frequent. There was also the matter of her phone. Lisa had always kept it nearby, but lately she'd become more protective of it. Mark would text her, and the messages, often innocent at first, had begun to take on a more flirtatious tone. Lisa would quickly lock her phone, hide it in her purse, or step away from James when it buzzed. James began to comment on her late nights, the extra hours she spent out walking or visiting friends. He seemed to question her movements more often, but Lisa was careful. She made sure to cover her tracks, telling him she needed space or just wanted some time to herself. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be long before he started to put the pieces together. One evening, James came home early from a business trip. Lisa was startled by the sound of the front door opening. She quickly stuffed her phone into the drawer, hoping she hadn't been caught. As she went to greet him, a cold shiver ran down her spine. Something in his eyes told her that the game was up, that he was starting to see through her carefully constructed facade. The day of Lisa's death began like any other. James had left for a business trip the night before, as he often did, leaving Lisa alone at home with her growing pregnancy and increasing feelings of unease. The house felt eerily quiet without him, and as she sat by the window gazing out over the water, Lisa couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of being trapped. She had kept up the charade for months, balancing her life with James and her secret meetings with Mark, but it was becoming harder to pretend everything was fine. Mark had been pressuring her for weeks now, urging her to leave James. He said he couldn't keep living in secrecy, that they needed to be together, for good. The weight of his demands added to Lisa's already fragile state of mind. She wasn't sure if she was ready to leave her husband, but the tension between the two men was beginning to suffocate her. She loved Mark, but she wasn't ready to lose the life she had built with James, even though that life now felt distant and unrecognizable. That afternoon, Mark called, insisting that they meet at her house. Lisa had tried to brush him off, but he was persistent. He told her it was urgent, that they needed to talk about their future. As she reluctantly agreed, she wondered if this meeting would be the turning point, the moment where everything would either fall apart or change forever. When Mark arrived, the atmosphere between them was charged with a sense of finality. He wanted answers, and Lisa was torn. The conversation began calmly enough, but as Mark's frustration grew, so did his anger. Lisa hesitated, torn between her love for him and the life she had left behind. But Mark wasn't willing to wait any longer. In a fit of rage, his emotions spiraled out of control. What started as a simple argument soon escalated into violence. In the heat of the moment, Mark shoved Lisa, and she stumbled backward, falling hard against the corner of a table. Her head struck the edge with a sickening thud. For a few seconds, she lay motionless, and Mark's panic set in. The shock of what had just happened overtook him as he tried to revive her, but it was too late. Lisa was dead. Mark quickly realized the gravity of the situation. The guilt and fear rushed through him, and he knew he had to act fast. Mark stood over Lisa's lifeless body, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was silent, except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore outside. The reality of what had just happened hit him with brutal force. The argument, the push, the fall, it all felt like a blur. One moment, he had been trying to reason with Lisa, begging her to choose him over her husband, and the next, she was lying motionless at his feet. He stared at her for a long moment, unable to comprehend the severity of what had occurred. Mark knew he couldn't call for help. The consequences would be disastrous. His mind raced, looking for a way out, a way to cover up the evidence. The room seemed to close in on him as he realized the terrible mistake he had made. In a frantic daze, he stumbled into action. He tried to revive Lisa, shaking her, calling her name, but it was clear she was gone. There was no time for grief or remorse, only survival. He quickly surveyed the room, looking for anything that might tie him to her death. The house was quiet, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. His eyes landed on the glass table in the center of the living room, the corner where Lisa had fallen. Mark knew he needed to make it look like an accident, something that could be easily explained away. The scene had to be believable. In a swift motion, Mark dragged Lisa's body outside. He moved her near the water's edge, where the beach was, secluded and rarely visited by anyone. He discarded her phone, far from where she had fallen, and arranged her body so it appeared as though she had simply stumbled and fallen while walking along the shore. Once the scene was set, Mark stood back, surveying his work. It looked convincing. Too convincing, almost. As the adrenaline slowly faded, he realized how deeply he had crossed a line. But there was no going back now. He quickly left the house, his mind still racing, and drove away, knowing he had to act fast before anyone could suspect the truth. The next few hours were a blur of panic and calculated calm. Mark returned to his home, trying to steady his breathing, but his mind was consumed by the events of the afternoon. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. When James called later that evening, Mark pretended to be shocked and concerned, expressing his condolences as if he too was caught in the tragedy. He knew that James, still away on his business trip, would likely return soon to find his wife missing. Mark's mind raced as he tried to anticipate every step of the investigation. He couldn't let anyone suspect the truth. The police were quick to launch a search when Lisa's body was discovered by a passing fisherman near the beach. Her fall, though violent, appeared accidental. There was no sign of a struggle or foul play, and the scene seemed to support the narrative that she had simply tripped and hit her head in a freak accident. The fact that Lisa's phone had been discarded far from her body further complicated the investigation, making it seem as though she had lost control and wandered off, oblivious to the danger. Mark's quick thinking had for the moment covered his tracks. The investigation team was methodical, and their questions were pointed. Detective Andrews, who had been assigned to the case, was an experienced investigator with a sharp eye for detail. He noticed the oddities, the fact that Lisa's body had been carefully placed, the lack of any real signs of a struggle, and the way her phone was discarded as if to mislead investigators. But, at first, there was little hard evidence to suggest foul play. Mark, keeping up the facade of a concerned neighbor, cooperated fully with the investigation. He provided a solid alibi, explaining that he had been working at home that afternoon. He expressed disbelief at the tragedy, playing the part of the supportive friend. But as the investigation dragged on, cracks began to appear. Detective Andrews was not convinced, and he began digging deeper, determined to uncover the truth behind Lisa's death, no matter how well Mark had planned to hide it. As the days passed, the investigation into Lisa's death seemed to stall. The authorities had no concrete evidence to suggest anything other than an unfortunate accident. Mark's calm demeanor and cooperative attitude helped him maintain his image as a concerned neighbor, and there was little to link him directly to the crime. However, Detective Andrews, who had a reputation for thoroughness, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right about the whole situation. He began to dig deeper, reviewing every piece of evidence with meticulous care, hoping to find the missing puzzle piece that would unravel the case. The breakthrough came when Detective Andrews examined Lisa's phone records. Though the phone had been discarded far from the scene, the messages on the device told a different story. There were numerous text exchanges between Lisa and Mark, their tone increasingly flirtatious and intimate. The last texts sent just before her death were particularly telling. They showed Lisa agreeing to meet Mark that afternoon, which, while not unusual on the surface, suggested that she had been in regular communication with him in the days leading up to the incident. Andrews knew something had to be more than just a random tragedy. As he pieced together the timeline, he realized that the pattern of Lisa's movements and the circumstances surrounding her death didn't add up. Her husband James had been out of town, and there was no record of anyone else seeing Lisa that day. But Mark's proximity to Lisa that afternoon raised serious questions. Andrews obtained footage from a neighboring property's security cameras. That showed Mark's car parked near Lisa's house during the crucial window of time. This discovery gave the detective the evidence he needed. Mark's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble, and Andrews knew it was time to confront him. The calm facade Mark had carefully built was beginning to crack, and the truth was starting to come to light. The web of lies Mark had spun was unraveling, and soon the police would be on his trail. The walls began to close in on Mark. Detective Andrews had his evidence, and the case was starting to unravel in a way that Mark couldn't control. It was only a matter of time before he would be caught. His nervousness grew with each passing day, and the false sense of security he had once felt began to dissipate. The police had gathered enough evidence to challenge his alibi, and the texts between him and Lisa were more than enough to link him to her death. Mark tried to cover his tracks, but it was too late. Detective Andrews had already pieced together the timeline of events. He knew the truth now. Mark had pushed Lisa to her death, driven by a desperate need for her to choose him over her husband. The incident, which had seemed like an unfortunate accident, was now a carefully orchestrated crime. On the day the police finally arrived at Mark's door, he could feel the weight of the inevitable pressing down on him. They arrived early in the morning, when the house was still quiet, and Mark knew the moment they stepped inside, it was over. Detective Andrews didn't waste time with pleasantries. He walked straight up to Mark and calmly placed him under arrest for the murder of Lisa. The interrogation was long and grueling. Mark initially denied everything, claiming that Lisa's death was an accident. But the evidence was overwhelming, and as the hours passed, his defenses began to crack. Finally, unable to maintain the lie any longer, Mark confessed. He described how their relationship had spiraled out of control, how he had pushed Lisa in a moment of anger, and how she had fallen, her head striking the table. He admitted to staging the scene, hoping to make it look like a tragic accident. The confession sent shockwaves through the small community. Lisa's tragic end was no longer just a story of a woman lost in an affair. It was a story of manipulation, deceit, and cold-blooded murder. Mark was arrested, and the investigation closed, but the aftermath would haunt everyone involved for years to come. Lisa's family and friends mourned her loss, and James was left to rebuild his life, forever scarred by the betrayal of both his wife and the man he had considered a friend.